Welcome back. You're still watching Namibia Connect on NBC. Now, let's bring you this interview. UNAM Professor conducted a research titled on pension policy, poverty and social grants in Namibia. The research examines how social grants, particularly old age pensions, serve as a lifeline for many vulnerable Namibians in one of the world's most unequal societies. In studio, we are joined by researcher for this document, UNAM Professor Dunia Zongwe, for us to delve more on this topic. Professor, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much and welcome to Namibia Connect.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolute pleasure to have you. Let's talk about when you started exploring this research. What really is the background on this?
Well, last year during, in Parliament, the finance minister announced that there was going to be an increase of the old age pension from 200 to 1,600. So that prompted a question, and the question was, what would be the optimal, what would be the ideal rate for for pensioners? So that's what prompted the idea to explore the optimum or the ideal rate.
Right.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on how traditional Western pension models then fail to account for African extended family structures, and also perhaps just help us explaining the expanded replacement rate specifically, which addresses these shortcomings in the Namibian context?
Yes. I have to note first that after the finance minister made that announcement, opposition leader Mark Henry Venani commented that the youth in Namibia they survive on old age pension. That was something that I found surprising, because the traditional thinking, the Western model, is one where the pensioner would be relying on it and not the other way around, the youth depending on the pensioner's limited financial means and pension in order to survive. So then to talk more generally about the Western models, why is it even relevant for Namibia? It's because when you look at the legal framework for pension in Namibia, it includes the legal documents that were actually passed during the South African administration of Namibia in the 1950s. And the assumptions made when coming up with these policies do not suit the realities of many countries in the global south, not just Namibia. And what are those assumptions? First of all, the assumption is that the pensioner, the dependent of the pensioners will be the nuclear family, and they probably don't have to rely on the pensioner. In fact, they can even assist to the extent that they work and so forth. So that's the first assumption. And the other assumption is that, for example, that people retire after employment. That is another assumption that needs to be revisited, because the reality is that many people work in the informal settlement, so they don't retire after employment. They do not work in the formal economy. So this is another assumption to be revisited, and it's important because it explains the insufficiency, because that's what the research has actually found. It shows the insufficiency of that amount. It's actually good news that it has been increased, but when you use the expanded replacement rate, you realize that it's actually not sufficient. Before I explain the extended replacement rate, we need to know what is the replacement rate. The replacement rate, and I'll try to explain it in ways that most of us will be able to understand. The replacement rate is the percentage that the pensioner will get after retiring. So it's a percentage of the income that the pensioner had before retiring. We call it technically the pre-retirement income. So the general practice is to say that it should be between 70 and 80%. But when you use the extended replacement rate, and the extended replacement rate takes into account the fact that that income doesn't only benefit the pensioner, it benefits the extended family and extended family networks. So in light of this, it's important then, as I said, to use the extended replacement rate. In the study, there's a formula that was used that takes into account the average household size in Namibia, which in the last census was 4.4%. So it is that needs to be taken into account, and when that takes into account, we realize that 1,600 is not sufficient. We have to talk about an amount that comes close to 5,000 Namibian dollars.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now that you've have these findings, what is your hope, and how do you of course, hope that these can also be included in our legal framework, especially now that we know that there's so many adoptions being made, and also being a lot of talks in Parliament, especially, of course, being raised about the challenges that of course what has been done now by the Minister of Finance and yeah.
Well, it's important to note. I noted the fact that the new name of the Ministry of Finance is now the Ministry of Finance and Social Grants Management. Right. I think it's a realization that of the importance of pension. And when I was doing the research, I realized that there is a scarcity of research legal research on this issue. So the research that we did filled that gap, and one of the solutions, because that's the question, so what can we do with the law in order to make sure that we have this extended replacement rate? Right. So it's the amendment of the Pension Act. The extended rate methodology must be inserted as a clause so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where the pension underestimates the needs of the pensioner. So the dilemma that I faced when doing the research, and you find that also in the economic literature, is that you have to be very careful. When the old age pension is too high, you are creating an incentive on those who depend on that money, including the youth in the household. It creates a disincentive for them to find income-generating, opportunities. So it has to be. That's why it's important to find the ideal rate, and that amount shouldn't be too high as to discourage income-generating opportunities, efforts. But it shouldn't be too low, because if you look at the statistic now, we are told that about half of the Namibian people are poor. So it should be an amount that can cover absolute poverty, but not an amount that is so high that discourages people from finding jobs. So that is how, those were also the concern, which technically we call moral hazard. You don't want the money to start affecting entrepreneurship and so forth. So that is the solution I would recommend, that amendment of the law to insert the expanded replacement rate methodology, but more broadly to actually create a unified pension legal framework, because right now it's fragmented. You have the pension policy in Namibia is covered by several different statutes, and there are different regulatory bodies and entities that have a role to play. We are talking about NAMFISA, the Ministry of Finance. Now the title of the Ministry of Finance indicates now the emphasizes the role that it plays in the management of old age pension. So this will need to be made coherent, because it makes it also very difficult for pensioners to try and seek redress when they are facing delayed or denied payments.
Absolutely. Now, your research also calculates an optimal pension of 5,326 Namibian dollars per month, compared to the current 1,600. What are the most significant legal, fiscal, and political obstacles that in implementing this to your now referencing from your research, and how might they overcome Namibia's current constitutional framework?
Yes, at the constitutional level, because we're talking about the obstacles, but let me put it also in the constitutional framework. Yeah. We have Article 8 that deals with the right to dignity, and Chapter 11 of the Constitution that encourages the government to adopt policies that will improve the welfare of Namibians. So that creates the constitutional environment in which the government will seek to resolve and to overcome these obstacles. The most obvious obstacle from a fiscal perspective is that, well, it's a huge increase. We are talking about more than 200% increase, and they will say it's not very realistic because the financial commitment will be enormous. Mm-hmm. It's not as if the government has only the administration of social grants to deal with. There's issues of healthcare, education, infrastructure development. So in the face of that obstacle, my recommendation is that it has to be gradual. Yeah. Already, I read that the government wants to increase going forward, but it has to be gradual.
According to the past, what we've seen, it has been increasing.
It has been increasing.
Fiscal, yeah.
Yes, yeah. But my article underscores the urgency of increasing it, because I'm aware of the physical difficulties. We are talking about the recession from 2016 to 2019, then the COVID-19 from 2020 to 2021, and then the ongoing cost of living crisis and the inflationary pressures. All of that make it difficult for the 5,000 to be, it cannot be done overnight. Mm-hmm. Already right now, if you talk about social grants in general and not just old age pension, we are talking about close to 7% of the national budget. So it is a huge allocation, and given all these economic constraints, it can only be done gradually. My research says gradually, yes, but urgently. And then another obstacle could be also with the methodology that was used in the research, in the sense that it's an average. If you look at the formula that was used, we're talking about the average, for example, household size based on the national census. You would know that that census was done more than 10 years ago. I was looking for the latest, but you probably have read that the next exercise will start this year and will be completed next year. But I don't think that in the meantime, in 10 years, that household size has increased dramatically. It's probably going to be around 4.4, if not more, 5. So that is important, but it is also, it remains an average, and it means that some pensioners are below that average and others above that average, using the logic of the methodology that would suggest, or even of the logic of the paper, that would suggest that some pensioners will receive more than they need, while others will receive less than they need. But the idea wasn't to say that we come up with a magical number. There's nothing magical about that number. It's just an indication of where it is supposed to be revolving around, the amount of old age pension. So that was the whole idea. So those are the two, in the research, the two major challenges that I've seen, the biggest one being the money. It's good to say all of that, but how do you deal with the money, considering also that from 2015 to 2023, that has increased from about 30% to close now to 65%. So we are dealing with huge pressures, and it's not an easy task. We'll see.
Of course, where we head from here.
Yes.
Talk to us about how the rights of pension recipients are protected under Namibian law, to your understanding, and do you believe that there are adequate legal mechanisms that, for pensioners to actually seek redress when payments are delayed or denied, and how these protections then are strengthened? Yeah,
it's something that will have to be dealt with, because in the legal framework in Namibia, you have the non-contributory regime and the contributory regime. In other words, the regime where the beneficiaries contribute money and where the government provides, and it's covered under two different statutes. In the non-contributory system, pensioners don't have much remedies, and that will have to be changed. The only remedies they have is administrative, but you have to take into account that many pensioners live in rural areas, so they have difficulties accessing, finding redress.
And also an issue, sorry to cut you off, the profits that we also have noticed, or rather it has been proven that, for most pensioners who actually get to migrate then from urban to rural areas, like you just mentioned, mentioned. How much of a factor that does that play, and what actually needs to be done in terms of research to actually, get those perhaps the information to actually also make this a factor that actually contributes to how much really has to be paid to each pensioner?
Yes, well, it does. That's the other, issue revolving around the average. The average, it averages the entire population, but the income of those, or the income needs of those living in rural areas, are different from those in urban areas. Yeah. The move is not surprising. A local economist, and he was quoted also in the Namibian, the newspaper, was actually saying that only 10% of Namibians can retire comfortably. So that move can be prompted by the fact that the pension itself is not enough. There could be many reasons, and research could investigate the reasons for that move, but it has also an effect to the kind of remedies that they can have. If they have to travel long distances to reach, for example, the Ministry of Finance and Social Grants Management in order to get redress, it's money involved. For the transport, it's time that they have to spend going through the processes, and currently in the law there's no time frame in terms of how quickly these complaints have to be dealt with.
It's usually prolonged. Yeah.
It is prolonged. So one solution, general solution, could be, and something the policymakers in Namibia can think about, is to create a pension ombudsman or ombudsperson. So because then it will create a streamlined administrative process that with it, it's important to include a time frame to make sure that they don't wait too long. And technology can also be leveraged so that, for example, there are several possibilities, but one possibility is for people through their phone to be able to lodge a complaint about payment and so forth. And it can be leveraged to also help people who cannot move to the offices, and to some extent those in rural areas, although some of them may have internet connectivity issues. Right. So in the contributory system, remedies are not as cumbersome as than the one that receive the old age pension through the Pensions Act. So they have that advantage, but in both systems, whether it's contributory or non-contributory, when it comes to litigating issues in front of the courts, then the dispute resolution mechanisms are really not adequate. So it is important to, through a unified, not just the national pension ombudsperson, but also through a unified legislation, to try to make it easier for them to deal with these. First of all, to file complaints, but also to seek redress. Another issue is the fact that some, because of age and also because of circumstances, cannot deal with the complexities that can be involved in these kind of issues. As I said, just the legal aspect of it, you are dealing with several statutes, and sometimes within the same statute, it is there are several things, several distinctions that the elderly may not have the time or the expertise to deal with.
Absolutely. Yes. Now that you have conducted this research, what are your steps then? Have you already approached policymakers perhaps to, of course, then take in the recommendation of this research on pension policy, poverty and social grants in the country? What are the next steps that you've taken to, of course, make sure that actually this recommendation actually is feasible, it's working, and it can, Namibia needs to, of course, now take the steps to, of course, implement it? Yes,
well, one of the key members of the audience that I'm targeting through this research is definitely policymakers. Right. And the hope is that when it gets published, because it has already been approved for publication, that it will also reach policymakers. But I'm also using this platform to, if some policymakers can hear me, to consider some of the research-based policy recommendations that have been made through the paper.
Absolutely. Yes. Is it your hope that in the future the policymakers can, of course, before, having platforms such as presenting the budget, also have academics such as yourself to, of course, be included in, of course, also making sure that when the plans are made, that on policy, pension policy, poverty, or rather anything else that, of course, you are also involved in this kind of decision-making processes?
Yes, academia must be involved because we are, in the job that we do, research is a prominent aspect of it. And we are, for example, at the University of Namibia, we are heavily funded by the government. It would make sense to use our expertise to debate questions relating to budget and other matters of national importance. Right now, that conversation takes place that I've seen, but mostly among economists. And that was one of the things that prompted my research. The fact that when you look at the policy and the legal aspect of it, there's not much that's been written. Right. Anyone who can search the internet will see that there's a huge gap there. And yet we are using the budget, which is a law. It is an act, the Appropriation Act. We are using statutes, which are act, and there are also policies issued. So it's important to look at that because it has definitely social and economic importance. You know, the reality that we are living is that pension is not just some sort of income insurance for the pensioner. It is a social insurance when you realize how many people depend on it in order to survive.
Take us through the steps. Let's take a bit of a step back to when you conducted this research. Who are some of the, the regulators that you've also worked with to coming up with this research? Have you ever, made some recommendations? Which doors have you knocked on to, of course, also get those proper research of what has been done already, and also what perhaps where the loopholes are, so that you can have this established?
The opportunity to deal with the regulators, those who have a big role to play, a rule-making role in this, I've not approached them yet. Of course, it was looking at policy debates that I got the idea of writing about it. But the book was it will be published in an edited volume in honor of the late South African Justice Yvonne Mokoro. Right. And she's known to be the judicial face worldwide, the judicial face of Ubuntu. So in writing the paper, the philosophical context was one of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is a contrast to the Western models of social security, right. The one that looks at the nuclear family and that looks at the pensioner itself. Right. I hope to have the opportunity in the future to engage stakeholders. I've already in the past, and even as we speak, I've consulted for different public entities, right. including one ministry. So I hope that we will have, because I know also that from the policymakers side and the government side, it is evolving. As you know, the Financial Institutions and Markets Act of 2021 is not yet fully implemented, and it does have also provisions dealing with pension, like the controversial preservation clause, the pension preservation clause, but there are also interesting provisions about maintaining certain benefits for dependents. And dependence is an important aspect of what I'm looking now, because the idea is that when we think of dependence, we shouldn't think about it in a Eurocentric fashion. Yeah. We should look at it in a way that reflects realities of people in the global south, and most importantly in our context, Namibia.
Very well. You mentioned earlier that this research has now been made public. For those who are interested in, of course, obtaining it, or what are the steps that they can take, and how can they, of course, reach out to not only have a conversation on this, but also perhaps get to learn more about this research, hopefully also to elevate the voice a bit higher to the policymakers, and of course have, as your hope would be, to of course have this implemented. Yeah.
Yes, well, it will be published in the book, which I hope will be published later this year. As I said, the paper has already been accepted. It has gone through peer review, right. And the peer reviewers accepted it. So I just have to put some final touches, yeah. And then the editors who are in control of this process. It involves several universities in South Africa, yeah. Because she was such a the judge that we are honoring was such a prominent legal figure and intellectual figure that I think there will be great interest for it to be published later this year. From what I see, yeah. Yeah. because I'm also involved in the editorial process, not for my own papers, but for at least one other paper from that edited book. I hope that it will be later this year. So they will just have to watch out for it. It will be an interesting publication beyond just legal circles, because the Ubuntu and of course the social security and old pension issue that I'm dealing with, goes beyond the legal field. So that I'll just ask them to wait. It shouldn't be. I hope it won't be long.
I hope it won't be too long either. Thank you so much, Prof. Perhaps your final remarks before we let you go, Prof.
Well, so when you see, in writing the paper, as I said, I wasn't just looking at just the focus. The clear focus was old age pension, but there was a bigger question that had to be dealt with, which have to do with the realization that the old age pension was playing a role that not many people suspected, which is to compensate for the lack of job opportunities. As we know, we are facing a severe unemployment crisis, and I think there's now a realization, which I believe also could have inspired the change of name, is that one of the most effective ways to improve the livelihood of the citizens will be to really pay greater attention to the issue of social grants and old age pension, because it has a more immediate impact than other, let's say policy initiatives that will take a longer time, that could even have a greater impact, but not an immediate impact as immediate as the one that would come when there's an increase, for example, of the old age pension.
Very well.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to present that to our viewers. Yes,
absolutely. Prof, thank you so much for being here this morning. Of course, wish you all the best. We hope to, of course, have you again to speak into detail now once the publication is out, and of course, hope to unpack that more. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.